Some mistakes change everything in a single heartbeat. That's what happened to June Carter on what should have been the happiest day of her life. She was about to marry Elias Burke, a mountain man who'd finally opened his heart after years alone. The little church in Dry Creek was full of neighbors when a stranger walked in, an older woman in a worn shawl. She reached out to bless the bride, but June, nervous and overwhelmed, pushed her hand away. The room went silent. Elias looked at June, then at the woman. "That's my mother," he said quietly. Everyone thought she was dead. Now she'd come back from the mountains to see her son marry, only to be turned away by his bride. Could June fix what she'd broken? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months before that terrible moment in the church, June Carter had arrived in Dry Creek with a single trunk, a teaching certificate, and a heart she'd promised. Herself she'd never risk again. The stagecoach had deposited her in front of Abernathy's general store on a September afternoon when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold on the mountainsides. She'd stepped down into the dust, her traveling dress already rumpled and stained from 3 days of rough roads, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Boston seemed impossibly far away. The failed engagement, her father's disappointment, the whispers at church socials, all of it had driven her west, to this raw frontier town where nobody knew her story. Mrs. Abernathy, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and capable hands, had taken one look at June and ushered her inside. "You'll be the new schoolteacher then. About time we had someone with proper learning." The last one married a prospector and headed to California. She'd poured June a cup of strong coffee and studied her with the frank appraisal of someone who'd seen plenty of Easterners come and go. "You look like you're running from something." "That's all right. Most folks out here are." The schoolhouse was a single room with a pot-bellied stove, 12 desks of varying sizes, and windows that looked out toward the mountains. June had stood in the doorway that first day, breathing in the smell of chalk dust and pine wood, and felt something settle in her chest. Here she could be useful. Here she could build something that mattered. The children had arrived in groups, ranchers' kids with sun-browned faces, miners' daughters with careful manners, the blacksmith's twin boys who tested her patience within the first hour, and Sarah Mitchell, 8 years old, with serious brown eyes, who'd stayed after the others left to ask June if she'd really read all the books in the world. "Not all of them," June had said, kneeling to meet the girl's eyes. "But I've read enough to know there's always another story waiting." Sarah had smiled then, a shy breaking open of her careful expression. "My ma says you took fancy, but I like it. It sounds like the books sound in my head." That's when June had known she could make a life here. Elias Burke had been harder to know. She'd first seen him at the general store 3 weeks after her arrival. He'd come down from his mountain cabin with a load of furs and venison, moving through the crowded store with an economy of motion that suggested a man used to being alone. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the peaks. He'd nodded to Mrs. Abernathy, conducted his business in few words, and was preparing to leave when June had accidentally stepped into his path. "Excuse me," she'd said, flustered. She'd been holding a bolt of fabric, considering whether she could afford it for new curtains in her small room above the schoolhouse. He'd stopped, looked at her for a long moment with those unsettling eyes, then stepped carefully aside. "Ma'am," he'd said, his voice rough from disuse, and continued out the door. "That's Elias Burke," Mrs. Abernathy had said, watching June's face with interest. "Lives up in the high country. Comes to town maybe once a month for supplies. Been alone since his father died 5 years back." What happened to his mother? June had asked, something in the man's solitary presence tugging at her curiosity. Mrs. Abernathy's expression had grown somber. "Disappeared when Elias was just a boy. Folks figured she ran off or got lost in the mountains. His father never spoke of her after. Raised that boy hard, I'm afraid. Made him into a man who doesn't trust easy." June had thought about Elias Burke more than she cared to admit in the weeks that followed. There was something in his careful distance, his quiet competence. that reminded her of the mountains themselves, solid, enduring, and keeping their secrets close. The second time they'd spoken, it was November. She'd been walking back from the schoolhouse at dusk, her arms full of books to grade, when she'd heard the unmistakable sound of a wolf. Close, too close. She'd frozen on the path, her heart hammering, knowing enough about the frontier to understand that wolves near town meant hunger, meant danger. Then, Elias had appeared from the tree line, rifle in hand. He'd fired once into the air, and the wolf sounds had retreated into the distance. He'd approached her with that same careful economy of movement, his eyes scanning the darkening forest. "You shouldn't be out alone this late," he'd said. "I had work to finish." June had heard the defensive note in her own voice and softened it. "Thank you." For the wolf. He'd looked at her then, really looked, and something had shifted in his expression. "I'll walk you back." They'd moved through the twilight in silence at first, June acutely aware of his presence beside her, the steady crunch of his boots, the way he kept himself between her and the forest edge. Finally, she'd said, "Mrs. Abernathy tells me you live in the mountains." "I do." "Is it very lonely?" He'd been quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then it used to be. Lately I've been noticing it more." Something in his honesty had opened a door in June's carefully guarded heart. "I came here to be alone," she'd admitted, "to start over where nobody knew me. But I'm learning that alone and lonely aren't quite the same thing." "No," he'd agreed. "They're not." At her door he'd tipped his hat, a gesture that seemed to cost him something, and said, "I'll be in town next week. Maybe I could walk you home again." "If you'd like." "I'd like that very much." It had become their pattern. Once a week, sometimes twice, Elias would appear at the schoolhouse just as the last light was fading. They'd walk together, talking in careful increments, sharing pieces of themselves like travelers rationing supplies on a long journey. He'd told her about the mountains, about tracking game and reading weather in the clouds. She told him about books, about the students, about Boston only in the vaguest terms, because some wounds were still too fresh. By January, he was staying for supper. By February, he was helping her split firewood for the schoolhouse stove. By March, the town had noticed, and Mrs. Abernathy was making knowing comments about spring weddings. The proposal had come in April, on a hillside above town where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. They'd ridden up together on his horse, June's arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. At the top, where you could see the whole valley spread out below and the mountains rising beyond, he'd helped her down and then held both her hands in his. "I'm not a man who's good with words," he'd said, "and I know I'm asking you to share a hard life. But these past months, you've made me remember what it feels like to have a reason to come down from the mountain, to want something more than just surviving another winter." June's throat had tightened with emotion. "Elias, I carved this," he'd continued, pulling something from his pocket. It was a ring, simple and beautiful, carved from mountain pine with a smooth, polished finish. "It's not gold or silver, but it's from the trees up where I live, and I made it thinking of you, thinking maybe you'd consider making a life with me up there." She'd taken the ring, feeling the warmth of the wood, the care in every curve. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me," she'd said truthfully. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." His kiss had been gentle, almost reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. And June, who'd sworn she'd never trust another man with her heart, had felt something break open inside her. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. The wedding had been set for June, appropriately. 3 months to prepare, to sew a dress, to write awkward letters to her family in Boston that went mostly unanswered. 3 months for the town to gossip and speculate and mostly approve. Elias Burke was a good man, they said. Keeps to himself but honest. And that schoolteacher, she's got spine. They'll do well together. June had thrown herself into preparations with an intensity that, looking back, she recognized as anxiety, masquerading as joy. She'd wanted everything perfect. She'd wanted to prove to the town and to herself that she belonged here, that she could be the kind of wife a mountain man needed, strong, capable, unshakable. Pride Her mother had always said, "Goes before a fall." The morning of the wedding, June had stood in Mrs. Abernathy's spare room, adjusting her simple white dress in the mirror. Her hands had been shaking, not from doubt about Elias. She loved him with a certainty that still surprised her, but from the weight of expectation. What if she couldn't adapt to mountain life? What if the harsh winters broke her? What if she disappointed him? "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Abernathy had said, fastening the last button. "And nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "I just want everything to be right," June had whispered. "Marriage isn't about everything being right," the older woman had replied, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about what you do when things go wrong. Remember that?" June wished later that she'd listened more carefully to that wisdom. The church had been full. Every family in Dry Creek and half the outlying ranches had crowded into the pews. Reverend Thomas had been in his best suit, smiling his grandfatherly smile. Young Sarah had been so proud in her role as flower girl, scattering petals with serious concentration. And Elias, standing at the altar in his one good suit, had looked at June as if she were the answer to every prayer he'd never known how to speak. Then the door had opened, and everything had changed. The woman who entered stood in the doorway for a long moment, silhouetted against the bright June sunlight. The congregation fell into an expectant hush, heads turning, whispers beginning. June, standing at the back of the church, waiting for her cue to walk down the aisle, felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. The stranger was older, perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her clothes were odd, a mixture of homespun fabric and what looked like buckskin, all of it worn and travel-stained. Most striking was the shawl wrapped around her shoulders, faded and patched, the kind of garment that spoke of hard use and harder years. Her face was weathered in a way that went beyond mere age, lined with the deep creases that come from squinting into wind and sun, from enduring cold that bites to the bone. She moved into the church with hesitant steps, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Elias at the altar. Something passed across her face then, pain and joy mixed together so thoroughly they became indistinguishable. June felt Mrs. Abernathy stiffen beside her. "Lord have mercy," the older woman breathed. "Who is she?" June whispered, irritation flaring alongside her nervousness. They'd planned this day so carefully, every detail accounted for. This wasn't part of the plan. "I don't know," Mrs. Abernathy said, but her voice carried doubt. The woman approached slowly, moving down the side aisle rather than the center, as if trying not to disrupt. But her very presence was disruption. The whispers grew louder. June caught fragments. Never seen her before. Dressed like she's been living rough. Who invited? When the woman reached the front pews, she paused. Her eyes found June, and in them was something June couldn't quite read. Sorrow, perhaps, or recognition of something June didn't yet understand. Then she did something that would replay in June's mind 1,000 times in the weeks to come. She reached into a pocket of her worn dress and pulled out something small, metallic. She took a step toward June, extending her hand in a gesture that seemed both offering and benediction. "Blessings on your marriage," the woman said softly. Her voice was rough, as if seldom used, but there was warmth in it. "May you find the happiness that was stolen from me." It was the word "stolen" that triggered something in June. The implication that this stranger knew something about hardship, about loss, and was bringing that energy into June's perfect day. All the anxiety that had been building for months, the fear of not belonging, the desperation to prove herself worthy of this place, this man, this life, it all crystallized into one sharp point of indignation. "I don't know who you are," June said, her voice carrying in the suddenly quiet church, "but this is a private ceremony. If you weren't invited, I'll have to ask you to leave." The woman's hand wavered. In her palm, June could now see what she'd been offering, a small tin locket, old and dented, hanging from a leather cord. "I came so far," the woman said, and now there was pleading in her voice. "Please, just let me—" "We don't need blessings from beggars," June snapped. And then, in a motion born of pure panic and misplaced pride, She struck the woman's outstretched hand away. The locket fell, hitting the wooden floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the frozen silence. It popped open, and a small photograph slid out, old, faded, but visible to those in the front pews. The woman stared at June for a moment, her weathered face registering hurt so profound it was almost physical. Then she bent slowly, retrieving the locket and photograph with shaking hands. "June!" Elias's voice cut through the silence like a knife. June turned to see him stepping down from the altar, his face drained of all color. He was staring at the woman with an expression June had never seen before. Shock, yes, but underneath it, something that looked like recognition struggling against impossibility. "June," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's my mother." The words didn't make sense at first. June's mind rejected them, scrambled to find another explanation. His mother was dead. Everyone knew that. She disappeared into the mountains 23 years ago, when Elias was just 12 years old. His father had searched for months, then years, then finally accepted she was gone. Elias himself had told June the story on one of their early walks, told it matter-of-factly, as if speaking of something that had happened to someone else. But now he was moving toward the woman, his steps uncertain, and June could see the resemblance she'd been too panicked to notice before. The same storm-gray eyes, the same straight nose, the same way of holding the shoulders as if braced against unseen weight. Elias, the woman, his mother, breathed his name like a prayer. "You're so tall now, so much like your father. They said you were dead." His voice cracked on the last word. "Pa searched. We all searched." "I know." Tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks now. "I tried to come back. For so long I tried." The photograph lay on the floor between them. Reverend Thomas, moving with the careful diplomacy of long practice, picked it up. June saw him glance at it, saw his expression shift from confusion to understanding to something like awe. "This is you," he said to Elias. "As a boy." Elias took the photograph with shaking hands. June watched him stare at it, watched his face cycle through emotions too complex to name. The image showed a young boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing in front of a cabin with a man and woman, his parents clearly, in happier times before whatever had torn them apart. "You kept this," Elias said. "All these years. It was all I had of you. Mary." June suddenly knew that was her name. Mary Burke, because Elias had mentioned it once in passing, reached toward her son again, more carefully this time, as if he might vanish like smoke. "When they took me, it was in my pocket. I kept it close to my heart every day." "Every single day took you?" Elias's voice sharpened. "What do you mean, took you?" But Mary was looking past him now, at June, who stood frozen in her wedding dress, her hand still tingling from the slap she'd delivered. The hurt in Mary's eyes was worse than anger would have been. "I'm sorry," June heard herself say, but the words came out strangled, inadequate. "I didn't know." "I didn't know," Mary said quietly. "You didn't." She turned back to Elias, seemed to gather herself. "I shouldn't have come like this. I thought, I hoped, but I see now it was a mistake. Your wedding day. I've ruined it, Ma." The word sounded rusty coming from Elias, as if he hadn't spoken it in so long he'd forgotten its shape. "Don't go, please. I have so many questions." The congregation watched in collective, breathless silence. June could feel their eyes on her, judging, pitying, shocked. Mrs. Abernathy had moved to her side, a steady presence, but June felt utterly alone. She dreamed of this day for months, planned every detail, and now it was collapsing around her in the worst way imaginable. She'd struck Elias's mother. The mother everyone thought was dead. The mother who'd been taken, kidnapped apparently, and had somehow survived and made her way back for her son's wedding day. Young Sarah, still holding her basket of flower petals, began to cry. The sound broke the frozen moment. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said with careful gentleness, "we should postpone the ceremony. Give everyone time to—" "Yes," Elias said, not taking his eyes off his mother. "Yes, postpone it." June felt the words like a physical blow. Postpone, not continue. Not work through this, postpone. Elias, she started. But he held up a hand. I need time, June. He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw confusion, hurt, and something that might have been disappointment. I need to understand what happened. I need to talk to my ma. The word hung in the air. Ma. Not this woman or the stranger. Ma already. In the space of minutes, his mother's return had shifted the ground beneath them. Mary pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. I should find somewhere to stay. I don't want to impose. You'll stay with me, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly, stepping forward. I have rooms at the boarding house. You're welcome there as long as you need. Thank you, Mary said, and the gratitude in her voice suggested she hadn't heard much kindness in a very long time. The congregation began to disperse, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as people hurried out to spread the news. A miracle, a scandal, a wedding interrupted by a ghost returned from the grave. By nightfall, every household in Dry Creek and half the territory beyond would know the story. June stood in her wedding dress as the church emptied around her. Elias was helping his mother toward the door, his hand gentle on her elbow, speaking to her in tones too low for June to hear. He didn't look back. Sarah approached June cautiously, her flower basket forgotten. Miss Carter, are you all right? June looked down at the girl, at her serious brown eyes full of concern, and felt tears finally break through her shock. No, sweetheart, she said honestly. I'm not all right at all. Mrs. Abernathy gathered June into her capable arms. Come on, dear. Let's get you out of that dress and somewhere quiet. You've had a shock. I've ruined everything, June whispered against the older woman's shoulder. Maybe, Mrs. Abernathy said with characteristic bluntness. But the sun will still rise tomorrow and you'll have a chance to make it right. That's all any of us get. Chances to do better than we did the day before. As they left the church, June caught one last glimpse of Elias and his mother at the edge of the town square. They'd stopped walking. Mary had raised one weathered hand to touch her son's face, and he was crying silently, years of grief breaking open at last. June had wanted so desperately to belong to this place, to this life. Now she wondered if, in her panic to prove herself worthy, she'd destroyed the one thing that had made her feel like she truly belonged at all. The wooden ring Elias had carved still sat on her finger. She touched it with her other hand, feeling the smooth grain, remembering the day he'd given it to her, remembering his words. You've made me remember what it feels like to have a reason to come down from the mountain. She'd given him that, and in one thoughtless moment she might have taken it away. The late morning sun beat down on Dry Creek, indifferent to human drama. Somewhere in the mountains a hawk cried. Life continued, as it always did, regardless of whether the people living it were ready or not. The room above the schoolhouse had never felt smaller. June sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still in her wedding dress, staring at nothing. Mrs. Abernathy had helped her up the stairs, brought her tea that had gone cold, and finally left her alone when it became clear that June wasn't ready to talk. Through the window, she could see the comings and goings of Dry Creek's main street. More traffic than usual. People clustered in small groups, heads bent together in animated conversation. Every so often, someone would glance up toward the schoolhouse, and June would pull back from the window, not wanting to be seen. She was the woman who'd struck Elias Burke's long-lost mother on his wedding day. By tomorrow, the story would have traveled to every ranch and mining camp within 50 miles. By next week, it might be a cautionary tale told across the territory. A knock on the door made her jump. June? It's Reverend Thomas. May I come in? She considered pretending she wasn't there, then realized how foolish that was. Yes, she called, her voice hoarse. The Reverend entered, his lined face kind but serious. He carried a leather-bound book that June recognized immediately. It had been Elias's father's journal, kept in the church's small library of historical documents. I thought you might want to understand, he said, settling into the room's only chair. What really happened all those years ago? June's throat tightened. Does it matter? I struck her. I humiliated her in front of the whole town. Nothing in that journal will change what I did. No, Reverend Thomas agreed. But it might help you understand what you're part of now. Whether you intended it or not, you're caught up in a story that's been unfolding for more than 20 years. He opened the journal, and June saw pages of careful handwriting, some entries neat and measured, others scrawled as if written in haste or distress. Jacob Burke, Elias's father, kept this journal faithfully. The Reverend continued. I've read it many times over the years. It's a record of a man's slow disintegration under the weight of unanswered questions. He turned to a page marked with a strip of cloth. This is from the week Mary disappeared. June moved closer despite herself reading over his shoulder. October 15th, 1853. Mary went to town today for supplies. Said she'd be back before dark. I told her to take the rifle, but she laughed and said it was broad daylight and only 5 miles. She always laughs at my worrying. Says I see danger in every shadow since we moved out here. Maybe she's right. Maybe I worry too much. October 16th, 1853. She didn't come home. I rode to town at first light. Mrs. Abernathy said Mary never arrived at the store. Found her horse wandering near Willow Creek, saddlebags still packed. No sign of struggle. No tracks I could follow in the rocky ground. It's like she vanished into thin air. October 17, 1853. Organized a search party. 20 men combing the hills. Nothing. Elias keeps asking when Ma's coming home. I don't know what to tell him. The entries went on, growing more desperate, then angry, then resigned. June read them with a growing sense of horror at the grief contained in those careful words. He searched for 2 years, Reverend Thomas said quietly. Then he decided she'd left him intentionally, that she couldn't bear frontier life and had run off back east. It was easier than believing she was dead, I think. Easier than accepting he'd never know. But she didn't run off, June whispered. She said she was taken. What does that mean? The Reverend closed the journal. I don't know yet. Mary's staying at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house, but she's not ready to talk about where she's been. I suspect the story is not an easy one. He looked at June with compassion. What you did today was wrong, but it came from fear, not malice. The question now is what you do next. Elias won't even look at me. He's overwhelmed. His whole understanding of his life just shifted. His mother, whom he's mourned for 23 years, walked back into his world. Give him time to process that, and if he decides he doesn't want to marry me after all. June's voice broke. If he decides I'm not the kind of woman he thought I was, then you'll have your answer, Reverend Thomas said gently. But I don't think that's what will happen. Elias is a thoughtful man. He'll come to see that you made a mistake in a moment of stress. What matters is whether you can make amends with Mary. After the Reverend left, June finally removed her wedding dress, hanging it carefully in the wardrobe. Looking at it hurt. All that hope and planning reduced to a garment she might never wear for its intended purpose. She dressed in her simplest day dress and, before she could lose her courage, walked to Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. The older woman answered the door with a knowing look. Wondered how long it would take you to show up, she said not unkindly. She's in the back room, but June, give her space if she asks for it. She's been through more than we can imagine. Mary sat in a rocking chair by the window, the worn shawl still around her shoulders, despite the room's warmth. Up close, June could see the true extent of her weathering, scars on her hands, a healed break in her nose, lines around her eyes that spoke of squinting into harsh sun and harsher circumstances. Mrs. Burke, June began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Mary turned slowly. Just Mary, please. I haven't been Mrs. Burke in a very long time. I came to apologize. June forced herself to stay standing, not to fidget. What I did was inexcusable. I was nervous and scared, and I lashed out at you for no reason, except that you weren't part of my plan. It was cruel and small-minded, and I'm deeply sorry. Mary studied her for a long moment. You love my son. It wasn't a question, but June answered anyway. Yes. Very much. I could see it in your face. Even in your anger, there was love underneath it. Love and fear all tangled together. Mary's weathered hand touched the tin locket at her throat. I know what that feels like. Love that makes you afraid of losing what you found. I don't expect you to forgive me, June said. But I want you to know that if you'd told me who you were, if I'd had any idea, Would it have mattered? Mary interrupted, not harshly. If I'd been any other stranger, someone without a claim on your husband-to-be, would you have treated me differently? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. June wanted to say yes, wanted to believe she would have been kinder. But honesty compelled her to uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. I hope so. But I was so focused on everything being perfect, on proving I belonged here, that I might have been rude to anyone who disrupted my plans. That doesn't excuse it. It just explains it. At least you're honest. Mary gestured to a chair. Sit down if you're going to stay. I don't like people hovering. June sat carefully on the edge of the straight-backed chair. Will you tell me what happened to you? Reverend Thomas showed me your husband's journal. He searched for you. Pain flickered across Mary's face. I know, I thought about him every day, wondering if he was looking, if he'd given up. If he thought I'd abandoned him and Elias. She pulled the shawl tighter, a gesture June was beginning to recognize as self-comfort. I was taken by men who wanted something Jacob had, information about a gold deposit he'd surveyed in the high mountains. They thought they could force him to reveal it by holding me, but he didn't know where you were. No, they realized that after a few weeks. By then, I was too far from home, and they were worried I'd bring the law down on them if they let me go. Mary's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. So they kept me, moved me from camp to camp for months. Eventually, I was traded to a band of renegades who'd left their tribe. Not bad people, just lost ones trying to survive outside both worlds, white and native. June listened in growing horror. For 23 years? Not with them the whole time. I escaped once, got recaptured. Escaped again, survived on my own for stretches. Learned to hunt, to read the land, to move through the wilderness without leaving traces. Mary touched the beaded bracelet on her wrist. A Shoshone woman taught me much of what I needed to survive. Her own people had cast her out for marrying a white trapper who died. We helped each other for several winters. Why didn't you come back to town once you escaped? I tried. Mary's voice cracked for the first time. Twice I made it close enough to see the lights of settlements. But by then years had passed. I was afraid. Afraid Jacob had moved on, afraid Elias wouldn't remember me, afraid I'd bring trouble with me because the men who took me might still be looking. She met June's eyes. Fear makes us do things we regret. You know that now. The parallel was clear, and June felt the sting of it. How did you finally make it back? I heard through the wilderness network, trappers, traders, the people who move between worlds, that there was to be a wedding in Dry Creek. Elias Burke marrying an Eastern schoolteacher. I knew it was my son. I'd kept track of him over the years as best I could, through fragments of news. I thought, her voice broke again. I thought if I came to his wedding, even just to see him happy from a distance, it would be enough. That maybe he'd feel my blessing even if he never knew it came from me. But you wanted more than that, June said softly. You wanted him to know you were alive. Yes. The admission came out like a confession. I'd survived so long with the hope that one day I could see my son again. I couldn't be there and not try to let him know. But I see now I should have approached him privately. Coming to the wedding was selfish. No, June found herself saying. Coming to the wedding was brave. I'm the one who turned it into something shameful. They sat in silence for a moment. Two women whose lives had collided in the worst possible way, trying to find a path forward. Finally, Mary said, Elias will need time. He loved his father, but Jacob's grief poisoned him. He raised Elias to be hard, to need no one, because needing people meant risking the kind of loss that had broken him. My son doesn't trust easily because of what my disappearance did to his father. He trusted me, June whispered. Yes, and today his trust was shaken. Not destroyed, I don't think. But shaken, Mary leaned forward. If you love him, you'll give him the space to find his way through this. And if you're truly sorry for what you did to me, you'll prove it through action, not just words. How? I don't know yet. But you're a teacher. You understand that real learning comes through doing, not just saying. Mary settled back in her chair, suddenly looking exhausted. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. It's been a very long day, June stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, she paused. Thank you for talking to me. And Mary? Welcome home. Mary's eyes glistened, but she only nodded. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. June walked slowly back to the schoolhouse, her mind churning with everything she'd learned. The weight of history, of pain carried across decades, of survival against odds she could barely imagine. It put her own mistakes into a different perspective, not excusing them, but contextualizing them. She'd wanted to prove herself worthy of the West. Now she understood that worthiness wasn't about perfection. It was about what you did after you failed. Elias Burke had always found clarity in solitude. In the mountains, problems reduced themselves to manageable components. Find food, maintain shelter, survive the season. Simple, clear. But nothing about his life felt simple anymore. He stood in his workshop, surrounded by the accumulated work of a lifetime alone. Furs stretched on frames, tools arranged with precise care, and in the corner, covered with a cloth, the unfinished cradle he couldn't bring himself to complete or abandon. The knock on his door startled him. Visitors were rare up here, which was how he preferred it, or used to prefer it, before June had taught him the value of company. Reverend Thomas stood on his porch, looking only slightly winded from the climb. "Thought you might appreciate some conversation," the older man said. "Or at least some company while you brood." Despite himself, Elias almost smiled. "I'm not brooding. Son, I've known you since you were 12 years old. I know brooding when I see it." The Reverend entered without waiting for invitation, his eyes taking in the workshop with interest. "How long are you planning to hide up here?" "I'm not hiding. I'm thinking. Thinking looks a lot like hiding from where I'm standing." Reverend Thomas settled onto a rough-hewn bench. "What are you thinking about?" Elias set down the leather strap he'd been working. "Everything, my mother, my father, June, how everything I thought I knew was wrong. That's a lot of thinking. My father raised me to believe my mother abandoned us, that she chose to leave, that she didn't love us enough to stay." The words came out harsh. "I built my whole life around that. Stayed alone, because needing people meant risking what he went through. And now I find out she was taken, that she spent 23 years trying to get back, that he was wrong. Jacob was a good man who made his son pay for his own pain," Reverend Thomas said quietly. "It wasn't fair to you, but he was drowning in grief and couldn't see past his own suffering to protect you from it." Elias moved to the window, looking out at the familiar peaks. "I don't know how to be angry at a dead man. Don't know how to forgive him when he's not here to ask for it. You do it anyway. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, Elias. It's for you. It's how you stop carrying their weight. And June?" The question came out quieter than intended. "How do I forgive her for striking my mother?" "That's a different question. June's alive. You can talk to her, understand her, decide if what she offers is enough." The Reverend leaned forward. "But I think you're not really asking about forgiveness. You're asking about trust. Can you trust her not to hurt you the way your father was hurt?" The accuracy of that statement hit Elias like a physical thing. "Yes, the answer is no. You can't trust that. She's human. She'll hurt you sometimes just as you'll hurt her. That's what love between imperfect people looks like." Reverend Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "The question isn't whether she'll hurt you. It's whether she's worth the risk of being hurt." Elias turned back to the room, his eyes landing on the covered cradle. "I was ready to marry her, ready to build a life. Then in one moment, she showed me a side of herself I didn't know existed. Someone who could be cruel, someone whose pride could override her compassion. Yes. And then what did she do?" "What do you mean?" "After she made that mistake, what did she do? Did she defend herself? Make excuses? Blame your mother for disrupting the wedding?" The Reverend raised his eyebrows. "Or did she immediately recognize her wrong and begin trying to make amends?" Elias remembered June's stricken face in the church, her immediate horror at what she'd done. "She tried to apologize. She did more than that. She went to your mother that same day. She's been working with her all week. Yesterday, when young Sarah Cooper took ill, June and Mary saved that child's life together. The Reverend stood, moving to the covered cradle. Your mother told me something interesting. She said June reminds her of herself at that age, proud, frightened, trying too hard to prove she belongs. She said if circumstances had been different, they might have been friends. They're becoming friends now, Elias said. Ma told me, said June's learning about healing plants, about wilderness survival. Said June asks questions and listens like she's truly interested, not just trying to earn favor. And that troubles you? It confuses me. I don't know whether to be glad they're getting along or worried that I'm the only one still stuck in that moment in the church. Reverend Thomas pulled the cloth off the cradle, revealing the half-finished woodwork. You started this before you proposed to her. Yes, it's beautiful work, careful, patient. He ran his hand along the smooth curve of the rail. Why haven't you finished it? I don't know if there's any point. So you're just going to leave it half done. All that work, all that hope abandoned because something difficult happened. The Reverend's voice sharpened. That's not the man I raised. That's not the man June fell in love with. That's your father's fear talking through you, and I won't stand for it. The words landed like a slap, but a needed one. Elias stared at the cradle, at the careful joints, the smooth curves he'd sanded for hours, imagining tiny hands that might one day grip them. I don't want to be like him, he said quietly. Don't want to let grief or fear turn me into someone hard and closed. Then don't be. Choose differently. Reverend Thomas moved toward the door. Come down to town, Elias. Talk to June. Talk to your mother. Stop thinking and start living. The mountains will still be here when you need them, but people, they don't wait forever. After the Reverend left, Elias stood alone in his workshop for a long time. Then with deliberate intention, he picked up his carving tools and returned to the cradle. Not because he knew how things would end, not because he had all the answers, but because leaving it unfinished felt like giving up, and he was tired of letting fear make his decisions. He worked through the afternoon and into evening, his hands remembering the rhythm. As he carved, he thought about his father, about the man Jacob had been before loss hardened him. Thought about his mother, not the ghost he'd mourned, but the real woman who'd survived impossible odds. And he thought about June, about her quick mind and determined spirit, about the way she'd made him laugh, and the way she'd hurt his mother, and the way she was apparently trying to become better than she'd been. Nobody was just one thing, he realized. Not his father, broken by grief but doing his best. Not his mother, both victim and survivor. Not June, both prideful and humble, cruel and kind. And not himself, neither the solitary mountain man nor the man who'd carved a ring from pine and offered his heart to an Eastern schoolteacher. People were complicated. Love was complicated. Life was messy and uncertain, and full of moments where you had to choose between fear and hope. Elias set down his tools and looked at the cradle, still unfinished, but closer to completion. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd go to town, face whatever needed facing. Because the Reverend was right. The mountains would wait. But people didn't, and he'd spent too much of his life waiting already, down in Dry Creek. June and Mary sat in the woods behind the schoolhouse as the sun set. Mary was teaching June how to identify different bark patterns, how to read the forest for signs of medicinal plants. This one, Mary said, touching a tree trunk, is white oak. The bark makes a strong tea for wounds that won't close. You peel it in spring when the sap rises. Miss Carter! Mrs. Burke! Young Timothy ran toward them, excitement in his voice. Sarah's awake and asking for soup. Ma says she's going to be fine. The two women exchanged smiles, their faces reflecting relief and something deeper, the satisfaction of knowledge shared and put to good use. Go tell your mother we'll come check on Sarah tomorrow, June said. And Timothy, thank you for being so brave yesterday. You helped save your sister's life by getting us so quickly. The boy beamed and ran off. Mary watched June's face, seeing the teacher's natural warmth, her ease with children. You'll be a good mother, Mary said quietly. June's hand went to the wooden ring. If I get the chance, you will. Be patient. Mary stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, a gesture that still seemed foreign to her after so long living rough. My son is stubborn, but he's not a fool. He'll come around. What if he doesn't? Then you'll survive. You're stronger than you know. Mary offered her hand to help June up. But I don't think it will come to that. I know my son. He's up there carving something in that workshop of his, working through his feelings, the only way he knows how. Give him a little more time. June took Mary's hand, allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. Thank you for everything, for teaching me, for not hating me. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay, Mary replied. I thought I came back just to see Elias, but maybe I came back to teach someone what I learned. To make all those hard years mean something more than just survival. They walked back to town together as stars began to appear. Two women from different worlds finding unexpected kinship in the space between what was and what might still be. The U.S. Marshal arrived on a Tuesday morning. 2 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't. His presence alone was enough to draw attention. A tall man with sharp eyes and a marshal's badge pinned prominently to his vest, leading a tired horse down Dry Creek's main street. He stopped first at the general store, asking questions. Within minutes, Mrs. Abernathy was hurrying to the schoolhouse, her face troubled. June, there's a marshal asking about Mary Burke. Says it's urgent. June's stomach tightened. She dismissed her students early, earning protests, and followed Mrs. Abernathy back to the store where the marshal waited. He'd been joined by Reverend Thomas and several townspeople, curiosity drawing a crowd. I'm Marshal Edward Coleman, the man said, his voice carrying authority. I'm looking for a woman named Mary Burke, formerly Mary Westfield. I was told she's in this town. She is, Reverend Thomas said carefully. May I ask why you're looking for her? I need to speak with her about a matter concerning her safety and possibly the safety of this town. Coleman's expression was grave. Is she here now? I'll get her, June said, her mind racing. She found Mary at the boarding house, tending the small garden Mrs. Abernathy had allowed her to start. There's a marshal asking for you, June said. He says it's about your safety. Mary's face went pale. She stood slowly, dirt still on her hands. It's them. They found me. Who found you? The men who took me. Or their associates. Mary's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. I knew there was a chance they'd track me here eventually. I'd hoped, but hope isn't always enough. By the time they returned to the general store, a larger crowd had gathered. Elias was there too, having come down from the mountain for supplies. His eyes found his mother immediately, then shifted to June with an expression she couldn't quite read. Marshal Coleman studied Mary intently. Mrs. Burke, I've been looking for you for some time. You're a hard woman to track. I learned to be, Mary replied. What do you want? 2 years ago you came to a marshal's office in Montana Territory. You gave testimony about a group of men involved in kidnapping, extortion, and murder. You said they'd held you for years, trying to force information from your husband about gold deposits in the mountains, the crowd murmured. Elias moved closer to his mother, his posture protective. I did, Mary confirmed. I'd escaped by then, had been free for almost a year. I thought if I told the law, they might be caught and couldn't hurt anyone else. Your testimony helped us identify them. But here's what you didn't know, Mrs. Burke. These men weren't random criminals. They're part of a larger operation that's been targeting frontier families for decades. Gold deposits, land claims, mining rights. They find valuable information and they take it by force if necessary. I told you everything I knew 2 years ago, Mary said, her voice tight. Why are you here now? Coleman pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag. Inside were documents, wanted posters, maps. He spread them on the counter of the general store, and June saw faces. 3 men, rough and hard-looking. Names beneath: Clayton Wade, Thomas Kern, Samuel Pike. These are the men who took you. Wade's the leader, smart, patient, and extremely dangerous. We thought we'd lost their trail 6 months ago after they hit a ranch family in Colorado. Killed the husband. Would have killed the wife and children if she hadn't been able to get to town for help. Coleman's finger tapped one of the wanted posters. But last week one of our informants sent word. They're heading this direction. And Mrs. Burke, we believe they're coming for you. The crowd erupted in worried conversation. June felt cold despite the warm morning. Why would they come for her after all this time? Reverend Thomas asked. Because she's the only witness who can identify them and connect them to multiple crimes across 3 territories. With her testimony, we can hang them. Without it, we only have circumstantial evidence. They know that. Coleman looked around at the assembled townspeople. They also know she has family here now. They know about her son, about this town. And men like Wade use leverage. They use fear. They use whatever they can to get what they want. Elias's voice cut through the murmurs. What do they want from her now? She doesn't know where any gold is. My father died years ago without ever revealing the exact location of the deposits. They want her silence, Coleman said bluntly. Dead witnesses can't testify. The word dead hung in the air like smoke. June found herself moving without thinking, positioning herself near Mary. Not protective exactly. She had no illusions about her ability to defend anyone, but present, standing with her. There's more, Coleman continued. The reason your husband never found your mother, Mr. Burke, wasn't just because they kept her hidden. They were careful. They moved her constantly. But they also did something we're only now beginning to understand. They made it look like she'd abandoned you, left notes in her handwriting saying she couldn't bear frontier life, spread rumors through traders and trappers, made sure your father would stop looking, would believe she'd chosen to leave. Elias looked like he'd been struck. They forged evidence. They made my father think. They weaponized his grief, Coleman said grimly. It's part of their method. Break the family's will to search, then keep the hostage isolated and compliant by convincing them their family has moved on. It's psychological torture, and it's brutally effective. Mary's voice was barely a whisper. Jacob thought I'd abandoned him. Abandoned Elias. All those years he believed I'd chosen to leave. Yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry. These men are experts at inflicting maximum damage with minimum risk to themselves. Coleman gathered his documents. Which brings me to why I'm here. I need your help setting a trap. With your testimony and your presence, we can draw Wade and his men out. Arrest them. And this, you want to use my mother as bait, Elias said, his voice dangerous. I want to use the situation we have to catch men who've destroyed dozens of families. Yes, there's risk. But there's risk in doing nothing too. They're coming, Mr. Burke, whether we're ready for them or not. The crowd had grown silent, processing the magnitude of what they were hearing. Mrs. Abernathy spoke up, her voice firm. If they're coming here, then we need to be prepared. This is our town. Mary Burke is one of ours now. We protect our own. June felt a swell of emotion at those words. One of ours. Despite everything, despite the scandal and the disrupted wedding, the town was claiming Mary as theirs. I won't put Elias in danger, Mary said. I won't risk this town. If leaving draws them away— It won't, Coleman interrupted. They know you're here. Leaving would just mean they follow you and catch you in the open, alone. At least here, you have allies. You have a chance. Elias looked at his mother, then at June, then at the marshal. What's your plan? The gold deposit your father surveyed, do you know where it is? Yes. Pa told me on his deathbed, made me promise never to go after it, said it brought nothing but grief. I've kept that promise. We use it as bait. We let Wade think you're finally going to retrieve the gold. We let him think he can get both, the gold and your mother. We set up an ambush in the mountain pass where the deposit is located. My men and I, along with any townspeople willing to help, we wait for them there. It's dangerous, Reverend Thomas said, for everyone involved. Yes, Coleman agreed, but so is doing nothing. These men have killed before. They'll kill again. This might be our only chance to stop them. June watched Mary's face, saw the internal struggle. The older woman looked at her son, and something passed between them. A lifetime of lost years, of pain, of survival, all compressed into a single look. I'll do it, Mary said, but on one condition. You keep my son safe. Whatever happens to me, Elias doesn't get hurt. Ma, no. I've survived this long, Elias. I'm not afraid of them anymore. Mary's voice strengthened. But I am afraid of losing you again, of bringing death to your door after finally finding my way home. You're not doing this alone, June heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. Whatever plan the marshal has, Mary shouldn't face it alone. She's not. She paused, finding the courage to say what she felt. She's family. Or she should be. And family doesn't let family face danger alone. Elias's expression shifted, something in his eyes softening as he looked at June, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since the wedding day. June's right, he said quietly. We face this together, all of us. Marshal Coleman nodded slowly. All right, then let's start planning, because if my information is correct, Wade and his men will be here within 3 days. Maybe 4 if we're lucky. We need to be ready. The meeting moved to the church, where they could talk more privately. Maps were spread out, the location of the gold deposit marked, defensive positions discussed. June found herself taking notes, her teacher's habits asserting themselves even in crisis. At some point, Elias moved to stand beside her. She felt his presence like heat, like hope. Thank you, he said quietly, for standing with her, with us. I made a mistake, June replied, not looking up from her notes. But I'm trying to make it right, not with words, with actions. I see that. He hesitated, then added, I've been carving, working on something. Would you like to see it when this is over? June's hand went to the wooden ring, still on her finger after all these weeks. I'd like that very much. They didn't have time for more. The planning demanded attention, but something had shifted between them. A door opening that had been closed. Not all the way open, not yet, but enough to let light through, enough to let hope survive. Outside, the sky was clear and blue, innocent of the danger riding toward them through the mountains. But in the church, a community was preparing to fight, not just for Mary Burke, not just for one woman's right to be free of her past, but for the principle that some things were worth defending. Home, family, the right to start over. And sometimes, June was learning, defending those things meant standing and fighting, not running away, even when you were afraid. Especially then, the next 3 days transformed Dry Creek from a sleepy frontier town into something resembling a military encampment. Marshal Coleman proved to be a meticulous planner, and the townspeople, once they understood the threat, rallied with surprising determination. Elias produced his father's old survey map, the one that had caused so much pain over the years. Seeing it spread on the church table, yellowed and carefully drawn, June understood something of what it had cost him to keep that secret all these years. The deposit is here, Elias said, pointing to a narrow pass in the high mountains. My father called it Eagle's Gate because of the rock formations. It's a natural bottleneck, good for defense if you're prepared, but a trap if you're not. Not perfect, Coleman said. We'll position men on both sides of the pass. If Wade and his crew enter, they won't leave except in irons or on a stretcher. What about Mary? June asked. Where will she be? With us, in the pass. She's the bait. They need to see her, believe they can reach her. Coleman looked at Mary with respect tinged with regret. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Burke. This is dangerous. If anything goes wrong— I've survived 23 years of wrong things, Mary interrupted. I'm not afraid of dying, Marshal. I'm afraid of my son paying for my presence here, of this town suffering because I came home. Then we make sure that doesn't happen, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. She'd appointed herself quartermaster of the operation, organizing food, medical supplies, and ammunition. We're not losing anyone to these devils, not on our watch. June spent the first day helping prepare supplies while watching the men practice. There were 15 townsmen willing to fight, plus the marshal and his 2 deputies who'd arrived that morning. Not a large force, but determined. Ranchers, miners, the blacksmith, men who knew how to handle rifles and weren't strangers to hardship. Elias worked alongside them, and June caught glimpses of the man he'd been before his father's death, before years of isolation had closed him off. He moved with easy confidence, checking weapons, suggesting positions, his military-style precision surprising some of the townspeople. Didn't know Burke had it in him, she heard one rancher mutter. Moves like a soldier. His pa was in the Mexican War, another replied. taught the boy to shoot before he could barely hold a rifle. Burke's been alone so long, folks forget he's capable of more than trapping and woodwork. On the second day, Mary began teaching June and several other women what she knew of wilderness medicine. Not just for the upcoming fight, but because knowledge needed to be shared. They gathered in the schoolhouse after regular classes, Sarah's mother, Mrs. Abernathy, young Timothy's aunt, and a few others who wanted to learn. Mary proved to be a natural teacher. Patient but direct, she demonstrated how to prepare poultices, how to recognize infection, how to stop bleeding with materials available in the wild. June took careful notes, aware that this knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. "If someone is shot," Mary said, her weathered hands demonstrating on a cloth dummy, "you need to stop the bleeding first. Forget everything else. No blood, no life. Use pressure, use cloth, use your hands if you must. Keep them warm. Talk to them. Fear kills as surely as blood loss, so you give them something to hold on to. Your voice, your presence." Sarah's mother raised a trembling hand. What if we can't save them?" Mary's expression softened. "Then you stay with them anyway. You make sure they're not alone. Sometimes that's all we can do, and it matters more than you'd think." The women worked in somber silence after that, each understanding that these weren't theoretical lessons. In 3 days, maybe 4, someone might be bleeding in the mountain pass. Someone they knew, someone they loved. That evening, June found Elias at his workshop. He'd come down from the mountain to stay in town during the crisis, sleeping in the church loft. But he still worked on the cradle when he had spare moments, his hands finding comfort in the familiar motions. "May I come in?" June asked from the doorway. He looked up and she saw shadows under his eyes. "Please." She entered the workshop, taking in the organized tools, the half-finished projects, the life of a solitary craftsman. The cradle sat in better light now, nearly complete. It was beautiful. Simple lines, smooth wood crafted with obvious love. "It's coming along," she said. "Yes." He set down his sandpaper. "I started it before I proposed to you. Stopped after the wedding. Reverend Thomas told me I was letting fear make my decisions, same as my father did. So I'm finishing it. Whether we ever use it or not, I'm finishing it." June touched the smooth rail, feeling the grain of the wood. "Your father made mistakes, but he raised a good man, a man capable of love, even if he was taught to fear it. That counts for something, does it? I've been alone for so long, June, and then you came along and taught me I didn't have to be. Then in one moment, I saw something that terrified me. Your capacity for cruelty, for pride that overrides compassion. It reminded me too much of how my father became after loss made him hard. I was cruel," June admitted, "and proud, but I'm learning to be better. Your mother is teaching me about humility, about survival, about what really matters. I can't undo what I did, Elias, but I can be different going forward." "I see that. I've watched you these past weeks. Watched you and Ma becoming, I don't even know what to call it. Not just making amends. Something deeper. Like you're becoming the family she lost, and she's becoming the teacher you needed." June felt tears prick her eyes. "She told me I remind her of herself when she was young. Scared and trying too hard to prove I belonged. The wilderness taught her that belonging isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, learning, growing, being willing to change." Elias moved closer, close enough that June could see the pain and hope warring in his expression. "I don't want to lose you. That's what terrifies me. Not that you made a mistake, we all make mistakes, but that if I let myself love you fully, without reservation, something will take you away. Death or circumstance or something, and I'll become what my father became." "That's not love talking," June said gently. "That's fear, and I understand it. But Elias, we can't live our lives trying to protect ourselves from loss. Your mother survived 23 years in impossible circumstances, and you know what she told me? She said isolation is its own kind of death, slower but just as certain. She said some risks are worth taking. In 3 days, she's going to stand in a mountain pass and face men who want to kill her. That's the kind of risk I'm talking about. No, that's courage. That's choosing to stand and fight instead of running. That's what I'm learning from her, that love isn't about safety. It's about being willing to be hurt, to be vulnerable, to stand beside someone even when it's terrifying. June took his hand, feeling the calluses from his work. I love you, Elias, and I know I hurt your mother, hurt you, and broke your trust. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it back. Not through words or promises, but through what I do. Through standing with your family when it matters. He looked at their joined hands for a long moment. The ring, he said quietly. You're still wearing it. I never took it off. It reminds me of who I want to be, the woman you saw when you carved this. Someone worth building a life with. You are that woman. You were always that woman. You just got scared and forgot for a moment. He raised her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. I'm scared too, June. Scared of losing Ma again, just when I got her back. Scared of losing you to my own fear. Scared that 3 days from now, everything will be different, and I won't be strong enough to handle it. Then let's be scared together, June said. And maybe that's what love is, not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it with someone beside you. He pulled her into his arms then, and June felt the tension in his body, the way he held her like she might disappear. She held him back just as tightly, offering the only comfort she could, her presence, her warmth, her refusal to let go. After this is over, he said against her hair. After we know Ma is safe and those men are in custody, ask me again. Ask me if I want to marry you. I will, June promised. And you'd better say yes. She felt him almost laugh against her shoulder, a sound caught between grief and hope. The third day brought Marshal Coleman's final preparations. He'd positioned his men throughout the mountains, watching the approaches to Eagle's Gate. Word came at noon. Riders had been spotted. 3 men matching the descriptions of Wade and his associates, moving steadily toward Dry Creek. Tomorrow, Coleman told the assembled group. They'll reach the town tomorrow morning. We need to move tonight, get into position under cover of darkness. If they see us setting up, they'll know it's a trap. Mary stood in the center of the church, the tin locket at her throat catching lamplight. She'd exchanged her worn shawl for a plain jacket, more practical for the mountain trek. But her face was calm, almost serene. I'm ready, she said simply. June moved to stand beside her, and Elias took his place on Mary's other side. Marshal Coleman studied the 3 of them, mother, son, and the woman who'd become something like a bridge between them. All right, he said. Let's go catch some killers. They left Dry Creek as the sun set, a solemn procession moving into the mountains. The townspeople who stayed behind, the children, the elderly, those who couldn't make the hard trek, gathered in the street to see them off. Sarah stood with her mother, her small hand raised in farewell. June waved back, thinking of all the children she taught, of the life she'd built here. She'd come to Dry Creek running from one failed future. Now she was walking into danger to protect another. The difference, she realized, was that this time she was running toward something instead of away. Toward love, toward family, toward belonging, toward the risk that made life worth living. The mountains rose before them in the gathering darkness, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But somewhere in those peaks was a narrow pass, and there tomorrow they would make their stand for Mary's freedom, for their future, for the simple right to build a life without fear haunting every choice. June touched the wooden ring on her finger like a talisman. Then, squaring her shoulders, she followed Elias and Mary up the mountain trail, into whatever morning would bring. Dawn came cold and clear to Eagle's Gate. June huddled behind a boulder, her borrowed rifle heavy in her hands, watching the narrow pass below. Around her, hidden among the rocks and sparse pines, the men from Dry Creek waited with Marshal Coleman and his deputies. Elias was somewhere to her left, positioned to have a clear view of the pass entrance. Mary stood in the open, deliberately visible, her weathered face turned toward the morning sun. The bait in a trap that had to work. June's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never shot at another person, never even imagined she might have to. Mrs. Abernathy had taught her to load and fire 2 days ago, and the older woman's instructions echoed in her memory. Aim, center mass. Don't think too hard. Just do what needs doing. The waiting stretched, minutes feeling like hours. June's legs cramped from her crouched position. Her fingers ached from gripping the rifle. Every sound made her jump, a bird taking flight, a stone tumbling down the slope, the whisper of wind through the pass. Then Marshal Coleman's signal came, a hawk call, perfect and piercing. They were coming. June saw them moments later. 3 riders entering the pass from the south, moving cautiously but not cautiously enough. They hadn't spotted the ambush. Clayton Wade rode in front, recognizable from the wanted poster, tall, lean, with the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled. Behind him came Kern and Pike, both armed, both scanning the rocks with professional wariness. They stopped 30 yards from where Mary stood. Well, Wade's voice carried in the mountain air, pleasant and cold. Mary Westfield? Or is it Mary Burke again? Hard to keep track after all these years. It's Mary Burke, she replied, her voice steady. It always was. You've been busy, Mary, talking to marshals, giving testimony, making things difficult for old friends. Wade dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. That wasn't very neighborly of you. We were never neighbors. You were my kidnappers, my jailers. You destroyed my family. Now that's not quite accurate. Wade took a step closer. We gave you opportunities. Told you repeatedly, just tell us where Jacob hid the survey details, the exact location of the gold, and you could go free. But you were stubborn. That's always been your problem, Mary. Too stubborn for your own good. Behind the rocks, June felt Elias tense. She could see him from the corner of her eye, his rifle trained on Wade, with absolute focus. My husband is dead, Mary said. Your leverage died with him. True, which is why we're here for a different reason now. Wade's pleasant expression hardened. You've become a liability, Mary. A witness who can put us at too many crime scenes. We can't have that. So we're going to make this simple. You come with us quietly, we make it quick. You make a scene, well, we know your boy is around here somewhere. We'd hate to have to hurt family. You've got no idea where my son is, Mary said, but June heard the fear beneath her bravado. Don't we? Wade smiled. Elias Burke lives alone in the mountains, comes to Dry Creek for supplies. Was supposed to get married a few weeks back, but his long-lost mama showed up and ruined everything. We know all about him, Mary, just like we knew you'd come back eventually. People are predictable that way. They always come home. Kern and Pike had dismounted now, spreading out to flank Wade. June's finger found the trigger of her rifle, her breathing shallow. Here's what's going to happen, Wade continued. You're going to walk over here nice and peaceful like. Get on a horse. Ride out with us. And maybe, just maybe, we let your boy live out his life in peace. But if you resist, if you make this difficult, if she resists, Marshal Coleman's voice rang out from his position, you're all under arrest. Federal warrants for kidnapping, extortion, and murder. Drop your weapons and raise your hands. Wade froze for just a moment, his eyes darting to the rocks. Then he moved, faster than June expected, drawing his pistol and grabbing for Mary in one smooth motion. The pass erupted in gunfire. June saw Mary drop and roll, her survival instincts moving her body before conscious thought. Wade's shot went wide, chipping rock where she'd been standing. Kern returned fire toward Coleman's position, and Pike was drawing on Elias. June didn't think. She aimed at Pike, center mass like Mrs. Abernathy taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Pike staggered, clutching his side, his own shot going into the dirt. He went down, and June felt a wave of nausea and triumph mixed together. She'd hit him, she'd protected Elias, she'd done violence to another human being. No time to process that. Wade was firing methodically now, providing cover as Kern tried to reach Mary. But the older woman had her own knife out, the one she'd carried through 23 years of survival. And when Kern reached for her, she moved like water, like wind, like something that couldn't be caught. Her blade flashed. Kern screamed. Blood bloomed across his arm. Elias rose from his position, his rifle trained on Wade. It's over. Drop it. Wade turned, his pistol swinging toward Elias. June saw it happening in slow motion, saw Wade's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Elias standing fully exposed, saw death arriving on a trajectory of gunpowder and lead. She fired again. So did Marshal Coleman. So did 3 other townsmen from their positions. Wade jerked, stumbled, but stayed on his feet. His gun dropped. He looked down at the blood spreading across his chest, then up at Mary with an expression of genuine surprise. "You should have run," he said, and collapsed. The silence after the gunfire was deafening. June's ears rang. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. Around the pass, men emerged from their positions slowly, weapons still raised, wary of additional threats. Marshal Coleman moved first, checking the fallen men with professional efficiency. "Wade's dead. Pike's wounded but alive. Kern, someone get medical supplies for Kern. He's bleeding badly." June scrambled down from her position, her legs unsteady. She saw Mary still on the ground, and fear spiked through her until the older woman sat up, apparently uninjured. Elias reached his mother in 3 long strides, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ma, are you hurt?" No, I'm fine." Mary's voice shook slightly. "Wade's dead?" "Yes." Elias helped her stand, his hands gentle, but his expression fierce. "It's over. They can't hurt you anymore." Mary looked at Wade's body, and June saw complex emotions cross her weathered face. Relief, yes, but also something like grief. Not for Wade himself, but for the years he'd stolen, for the violence that had finally ended him. "I thought I'd feel different," Mary said quietly. "I thought when he was gone I'd feel free. But I just feel tired." June approached them, still holding the rifle awkwardly. "Mary, are you sure you're not hurt?" Mary looked at her, and in her eyes June saw recognition, not just of June herself, but of what June had done. "You shot Pike, I saw you. You protected Elias?" "Yes." "I did." June's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I couldn't let him hurt either of you." Elias looked at June then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not just love, that had been there all along, buried under hurt and confusion. This was respect, recognition that she'd stood and fought when it mattered most. Marshal Coleman was binding Kern's wound with the help of 2 townsmen. Pike groaned from where he'd fallen, conscious but clearly in pain. The marshal's deputies were already securing the prisoners, preparing them for transport. "Mrs. Burke," Coleman called, "I need you to identify these men officially. For the record." Mary straightened, squaring her shoulders. She walked to where Kern lay, looking down at him with an expression June couldn't quite read. "Thomas Kern. He was the one who took me initially, grabbed me on the road to town, put a sack over my head, tied me to a horse. That was 23 years ago." Kern looked away, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. She moved to Pike next. "Samuel Pike. He was in charge of guarding me the first winter. Beat me twice when I tried to escape. Told me my family had forgotten me, that my son didn't even remember my face." Pike said nothing, his face gray with pain and something that might have been shame. Finally, she stood over Wade's body. Clayton Wade, the leader, the one who orchestrated everything, the one who told my husband through intermediaries that I'd run off with a lover, that I never wanted to see him again, the one who destroyed my family with lies as much as with violence. Her voice remained steady throughout, and June marveled at her strength. To face these men who'd stolen so much of her life, to speak calmly and clearly about what they'd done, it was a kind of courage June was still learning to understand. "That's all I need," Coleman said gently. "Thank you, Mrs. Burke. Your testimony, combined with what we witnessed here today, will be enough to ensure justice is served." "Justice." Mary repeated the word softly, as if testing its weight. "I suppose that's all we can ask for." The townsmen began the work of removing bodies and securing prisoners. Elias produced his father's map, the map that had caused so much pain, and held it up so everyone could see. Then deliberately he struck a match and set the corner alight. "No more gold," he said as the map burned. "No more chasing something that only brings death. My father was wrong to survey it, wrong to tell anyone it existed. This is where that story ends." June watched the flames consume the yellowed paper, understanding what the gesture meant. Elias was burning more than a map. He was burning his father's obsession, the legacy of grief that had shaped his childhood, the cycle of violence that had claimed Mary's years. The map crumpled into ash, and Elias let the pieces scatter in the mountain wind. Mary touched her son's arm. "Your father did the best he could with the pain he carried. Don't hate him for it." "I don't," Elias said. "Not anymore. But I won't carry his burden forward either. We make our own path from here." Marshal Coleman approached, removing his hat respectfully. "We'll need Mrs. Burke to come to the territorial capital for the formal trial. Probably a week or two from now. But after that, she's free." No more looking over her shoulder. No more running. Free! Mary breathed the word like a prayer. The sun had fully risen now, bathing Eagle's Gate in golden light. The pass that had been a battleground minutes ago was returning to peace. Birds resumed their calls. The wind carried the scent of pine and stone. June set down her rifle, her hands still shaking slightly. She'd fired a weapon at another human being today, had wounded a man, possibly saved Elias's life, certainly changed something fundamental in herself. She didn't know yet what that meant, how it would sit with her in the quiet hours to come. But she knew she'd do it again if necessary. That was the measure of how much she'd grown, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Elias came to her, his mother close behind. He took June's hands in his, steadying them with his warmth. "Thank you," he said simply, "for standing with us, for everything. We're family," June replied. "Or we should be." "That's what family does," Mary smiled, tired but genuine. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what family does." They stood together in the morning light, three people bound by trauma and choice and love that had been tested and proven true. Below them, Dry Creek was waking to a new day, unaware yet that the danger had passed, but soon they would know. Soon the word would spread. Mary Burke was free, the outlaws were caught, and the town could rest easy soon. But for now, in this moment of aftermath, they simply stood together on the mountain, breathing, alive, victorious in the way that matters most, not unscathed but unbroken. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, when the aspens had turned to gold on the mountainsides, Dry Creek gathered again for a wedding. This time there were no secrets. No strangers arriving to disrupt carefully laid plans. No fear masquerading as pride. Just a community coming together to witness something they'd all helped make possible. A marriage earned through fire and forgiveness. June stood in Mrs. Abernathy's spare room, adjusting the same white dress she'd worn before. It felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of expectation had been lifted. Mary stood beside her, helping with the buttons, with steady, capable hands. "Nervous?" Mary asked. "No," June said, and was surprised to find it true. Excited, hopeful, but not nervous. Everything that could go wrong already did, and we survived it. "That's one way to look at marriage," Mary said with a slight smile. "Trial by fire before the vows? Did you know?" June asked. "That day when you walked into the church, did you know I was going to react badly?" Mary considered this. "I knew you were frightened. Could see it in how you held yourself, how you looked at the townspeople, like you were waiting to be judged and found wanting. I'd been there myself, a lifetime ago when I first came west. So no, I didn't know you'd strike me. But I understood the fear that led to it. I'm sorry," June said, not for the first time, but meaning it just as deeply as the first. "For hurting you, for making you feel unwelcome. I know you are. And June, I forgive you. Not because you've earned it through grand gestures, though standing with us in that mountain pass counted for something, but because holding on to anger is exhausting, and I'm tired of carrying weight I don't need." Mary finished the last button and turned June to face her. "Besides, I'm getting a daughter out of this. That's worth more than holding a grudge." June felt tears prick her eyes. "I never had a mother I could talk to. Mine was always so focused on society's rules, on what people would think. She couldn't understand why I wanted to come west." "Then we're both getting something we needed," Mary said softly. "I'm getting the chance to be a mother again. You're getting the family you chose instead of the one you were born into. That seems like a fair trade. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mrs. Abernathy entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "The blacksmith finished these this morning," she said, unfolding the cloth to reveal 2 rings, simple gold bands, warm and glowing in the morning light. "The whole town contributed. Wanted you both to have something better than a wooden ring to start your life with. Though," she added quickly, "there's no shame in the wooden one." Elias's heart went into that. June looked at the rings, her throat tight. "The whole town. Even the families who were gossiping 2 weeks ago," Mrs. Abernathy confirmed. "Funny how fighting off outlaws together changes people's perspectives. You're one of us now, June, no question about it." Outside, the church bell began to ring. Time to begin. This walk down the aisle felt different than before. Then June had moved through a haze of anxiety, seeing the townspeople as judges, as obstacles to overcome. Now she saw them clearly. Mrs. Cooper with young Sarah, both healthy and smiling. Timothy sitting with his family. The ranchers and miners who'd stood in the mountain pass. The women Mary had taught about healing plants. People who'd become not just community, but family. Elias stood at the altar in the same suit he'd worn before, but his expression was completely different. No tension in his shoulders, no wariness in his eyes, just joy, pure and uncomplicated as he watched June approach. Mary sat in the front pew, not in the congregation where she'd stood before, but in the place of honor. She wore a new dress, the faded shawl replaced with something that fit better, though June noticed the beaded bracelet still on her wrist. Some reminders of survival were worth keeping. Reverend Thomas smiled as June reached the altar. "Shall we try this again?" he said gently, and soft laughter rippled through the church. The vows were the ones June and Elias had written together in the evenings after Eagle's Gate. Sitting in Elias's workshop while he finished the cradle, and they talked through what marriage meant to them now. "I promise to stand with you," Elias said, holding both her hands in his. "In easy times and hard times, when I'm afraid and when I'm brave. I promise not to let my father's fear become mine, not to choose isolation when connection is harder but truer. I promise to see you, not the person I imagine, but the person you are. And I promise to love you, June Carter, for as long as I draw breath." June's voice remained steady as she spoke her own words. "I promise to meet you where you are, not where I think you should be. I promise to be humble enough to learn and brave enough to change. I promise to stand with your family as if they were my own, because they are. And I promise to love you, Elias Burke, not perfectly, but honestly, for all my days." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, the church erupted in applause. June felt Elias's kiss, gentle, joyful home, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The reception was simple but joyful. Food shared, stories told, music played on a borrowed fiddle. Mary taught several townspeople dances she'd learned from the Shoshone woman who'd helped her survive. Young Sarah gave June a drawing she'd made, the 3 of them. Elias and June and Mary, standing together under a mountain sky. As evening approached, June and Elias prepared to leave for Elias's cabin, their cabin now. The wagon was loaded with June's belongings, with gifts from townspeople, and with the completed cradle wrapped carefully in blankets. Mary embraced them both. "I'll see you Sunday for dinner," she said. "I've decided to stay in town, help Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house, teach the women more about healing. I've had enough of isolation. You're always welcome at the cabin," Elias said. "Any time. It's your home too, I know," Mary replied. "But you two need time to build your life together. I'll visit. But this is your beginning, not mine. I had my beginning once, a long time ago. Now I'm learning to build an ending that's peaceful instead of haunted." They rode toward the mountain as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. June sat beside Elias on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, the wooden ring and the gold one both on her finger, past and present together. "Tell me about the cabin," she said. "Our home. It's simple," Elias said. "One room, a good stove, windows that look out at the peaks. I built it for solitude, but I think it'll be better filled with life, with you. Maybe eventually," he glanced at the cradle in the wagon bed, "with family. "I'd like that," June said softly. "A family we choose. A life we build together. Not perfect, but real." They reached the cabin as full darkness fell. Inside, Elias had prepared everything. Fire in the stove, lamps lit, the space warm and welcoming. June saw Mary's herb pouch hanging on the wall, a gift and a connection. She saw the wooden ring Elias had carved in a place of honor on the mantel, and she saw the cradle by the hearth, waiting for a future they would create together. "Welcome home," Elias said. And June heard in those words everything that mattered: belonging, acceptance, love that had been tested and proven true. "Yes," she said, stepping into his arms. Home. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under the stars. Somewhere in Dry Creek, Mary Burke sat in her room at the boarding house, writing letters to family she hadn't spoken to in 23 years, building bridges to a future she'd never expected to have. And in the schoolhouse, Sarah's drawing hung on the wall, a reminder that family was what you made of it, that belonging was earned through showing up, and that sometimes the hardest journeys led to the most worthwhile destinations. Some mistakes changed everything, but so did forgiveness, so did courage, so did the choice to stand together when standing alone would have been easier. In the cabin, June and Elias stood at the window, looking out at the night. His hand found hers, their rings, wooden and gold, catching the firelight. Two people who'd found each other despite fear, who'd built a family from broken pieces, who'd learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about the choice to stay, to grow, to become more together than they could have been apart. The wooden ring, the gold ring, the cradle by the fire, the herb pouch on the wall, artifacts of a journey that had led them here, to this moment, to this beginning, to home.